questions?
Nice artwork.
Ellie, I'm introducing you. Let it be. I almost said good Shabbos, sorry. Usually here. Well, welcome to Temple Shir Shalom. We're thrilled that we could partner with Temple Israel and be a part of this program with Reboot and The Well. And so we're really blessed to have so many great organizations in our community that have vision and want to program together and create opportunities for us to learn and share and meet wonderful people who come to our community that offer something special and unique. So I want to thank Ellie Barnett, who came to us and pitched this idea, right? Some applause. There's a young man back there. That's right. Ellie came to us, I think in June, with this idea and said, I want you to read this book and eat correct supper. And I said, okay, there's whatever Ellie says we do. And that's how it works in Church. And Ellie, of course, working with Reboot, said this is a really cool opportunity and idea, and I hope you think this is worthwhile. And Rabbi Daniel and me said, let's do this. This sounds great. And so what about Rabbi Jen? Is that okay? He said, no, actually said Rabbi Josh. He said, no, Rabbi Jen. So, and we said, look, Temple Israel, Shir Shalom, we're really blessed to do programming and opportunities together. So it's great to have this chance, not only to meet with Rebecca, hear about what she's doing, the book she's written, and the guide she's given us, and to ask her some questions about that, but also to be part of the community with our friends from Israel. But first, I turn to our friend Ellie.
Thanks, Rabbi Mike. Yikes. Kind of an off-script kind of from around the world as well. The network grows every year, and they elect more and more of their peers so they can collaborate on projects, anything that they want to annually, once in person, and then all the time, of course, electronically as they wish. So it is such a privilege always to bring a rebooter to the local level, and that's what my colleagues and I at Reboot do. So Rebecca is actually coming here from Austin, Texas. So she's come far to talk to us today. We really appreciate that. And it's just such an honor to have her here. And I am normally pride myself on no script, but I want to introduce her properly with her CV, and it's quite long and impressive, so I would like to read it directly. So, Rebecca Sofer here is the co-founder of Modern Loss, which offers creative, meaningful, and encouraging content and community addressing the long arc of grief. She is also the author of the best-selling Modern Loss Handbook, an interactive guide to moving through grief and building your resilience, which Gayle King, Oprah's BFF, if you don't know her by name, named a favorite read of the year, with Michelle Obama's actually being the other one. Rebecca is also the co-author of the book Modern Loss, Candid Conversation About Grief, Beginner's Welcome. Her writing has appeared in such outlets as the New York Times, Time, Glamour, and NBC, and she frequently speaks on loss and resilience around the world, including at the Capital One, Amazon US and UK, and HBO. Rebecca is a Peabody Award-winning former producer for The Colbert Report and a Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism alumna. Before I hand it over to Rebecca and the rabbis, I just want to give you some instructions with the cards that you picked up on your way in. So throughout the program, we are going to be doing an activity that Rebecca will lead, which will use one of the postcards. The other one is if you have any questions that you think of during the program that you want to write down, you will be able to hand them to us and we can send them to her for the Q&A time. There will also be handheld microphones if you want to just stand up and ask as well. If you didn't get a postcard and you'd want one or you need more for more questions, feel free to raise your hand and my friend Erica from The Well will be able to drop one off to you. I'm going to send it over to Rabbi Calusi. And Rebecca, thank you again for coming here. We really appreciate it. Welcome.
So we have people here tonight that I've already recommended the book to, and I just think it's phenomenal, and it's so different than any other kind of grief handbook or guidebook that I've ever picked up, and it's something that we desperately need. And so tell me how you got here. Tell me the history of.
Fine. It's my fault, as always.
Brian, you got that? Okay. Hey, Ellie, can we have that mic? Where'd you get that microphone you had in your hand? Ellie, I need that microphone. We'll use these. We'll see if these are better.
Oh, you
They're all from Shir Shalom. They're adjusted to my resonance and my voice. And so I'm sorry. One of you have Cantor pennies. I thought that would work fine, but we'll see if that works better. There you go.
It only responds to its master.
Okay, we're good.
Oh, right. There was a question.
There was a question before.
Sorry. I thought we were going to keep talking about
Right,
AV
no. The
stuff.
question was, why modern loss?
Yes.
How did we get here?
So first of all, I just want to say I'm so incredibly delighted to be here. When I say that we've been talking about this evening for nearly a calendar year, we all exaggerate. Many of us are Jewish. We're known for hyperbole and all that stuff. This is a fact. This has been in process for so long. I'm a very proud member of Reboot. It's a phenomenal organization. I encourage you all to learn about it. It's been really integral in helping me with my own creative projects and connections. And I'm just so grateful to be here, to all of the partners that banded together to bring me here, because that is no small feat. And so just very, very delighted. Thank you so much. I very nearly almost went to college near here at University of Michigan. And I grew up in Philadelphia. Anyone Philly? No. Oh, wow. Okay. So I'm from Philly, and my mom said, you got in, we're proud, let's visit in the middle of February. So I went to Emory in Atlanta. So, this is something, I have done a lot of work in the world of grief and loss and community building, and I would say that I've dedicated my career to doing everything that I can within my very, very limited abilities to create platforms that help move the needle with regard to how we approach the topics of grief and loss. And not just like my mom died yesterday grief and loss, but I had a loss 25 years ago, and I still live with it. It still comes in ways. It still informs how I live. But know about it, because we really do a good job of stigmatizing that in our culture, and that I ever sought out to do. This was not my goal in life. My goal in life was to get my master's in journalism eventually, which is what I did at Columbia, and work in political satire, make very little money, not even maybe get health care. So I achieved both of those goals very quickly, working for Stephen Colbert. But what I really loved about political satire was that you had to be really, not to talk about myself, but I was probably the dumbest person at the show. Everybody there had higher degrees. I was working alongside JDs, MBAs, people with PhDs, because you really need to know what you're talking about when you're making light of it, when you're really serving it up in ways that are very entertaining. And you really need to have the ability to take a topic that is very scary sometimes and overwhelming to people and serve it up to them in ways that don't make them go running for the hills, but in fact teach them because they're listening. And so that was what I really loved. That's how I wanted to apply my journalistic skills, because I also had trouble writing straight news pieces. So I worked for Comedy Central. But while I was there, I got a phone call the very night that I came back from a camping trip with my parents in upstate New York in the Adirondacks. Not sure who's familiar with a place called Lake George. It's a very beautiful, hello people, my people. What? Oh my God. Okay, we have to talk. So we went camping on the islands there every single year, my entire lifetime. And we went camping that August, just my parents and I. And my father had a son from a previous marriage who's much older than I am. So we were all camping. We finished this trip. We pack up the car. They drive me back to New York City. I have to go back the next day to work to my studio. And I'm still, and so for me, that was the entry point into the entire rest of my life. The next There have been many chapters, but the primary second chapter, which is in me living with the after of, receiving the news and moving through, I would say, the crucible of profound grief, the rug being pulled out from underneath my feet, the sudden or eventual, even for some people, loss of someone who you kind of expected to be there as you hit milestones, as you celebrated, as you mourned, as you struggled, as you needed a cheerleader. And she was no longer there. And she was my conversation. And to finish like this very long, like kind of self-introductory, description, I felt like there was really something missing in how we talk about grief and loss that was not rooted in religious dialogue, because that's great, but not everybody wants it all the time. That wasn't rooted in clinical dialogue or like Googling what is wrong with you at 2 a.m. And that certainly wasn't rooted in platitudes, because I got really sick of people putting their hand on my shoulder and assuring me that it takes a year, when I found out very quickly that it certainly doesn't. So that's what Modern Loss came out of. I promise I'll be a lot more succinct in every other answer.
So it's been 10 or 11 years. What have you seen? What has been the evolution? What have you seen change between 2013 and 2024?
So I think a lot. I mean, I think, and that's, some of that is meant to be very hopeful, actually. So when I launched modernloss.com, which I co-founded with a friend of mine, Gabby Berkner, whose father and stepmother were killed during a home invasion. We became friends. We were like grief friends. And she's a journalist too. And we really bonded over this. And I kind of was like, I have this idea. We're going to do it together. When we would go to like dinner parties separately in New York, I'm in New York. I know that Ellie said I came in from Austin, Texas, but I recently moved there and I have no idea when it is up. So I'm really a New Yorker who like no one knows what to do with there because I keep wearing black in Texas. So I would go to these dinner parties and people would say, oh, what are you working on now? Because I heard you left Colbert. And they would expect for me to say The Daily Show, or like I moved over to some other, show. And I said, well, I'm working on this cool website and it's going to be an online magazine. It's going to be about grief and it's going to be awesome. And literally imagine the record screeching to a halt. And I got so much like side eye, so many uncomfortable like, oh, why would you want to do that? Or even like, how are you going to make any money doing that? And I didn't have the answer for that at that moment, and I still barely make any money doing this. But I just knew, I was like, whoever's asking me that question, I just became more and more convinced of the need for this, because I was like, this is just showing that like if someone feels like this is a weird thing to be doing, that they don't understand how badly we all need it, and how eventually they will need something like this, and they might be very grateful that it exists, not if, but when they're faced with moving through a profound loss, So I think that grief was kind of like a 4-letter word 10 or 11 years ago. And I've just continued to like ignore everybody and just do my thing and stay really committed to this. And, it's grown and grown. And the very sad reality is that it took a global pandemic for people to all kind of come to and contend with the enormous layers of profound loss that we were all faced with, from death loss to identity loss to geographic movement and job changes and taking on all these roles, to realize that we're all grieving. Grief is so pervasive in our lives. And if we don't talk about it in ways that are raw and vulnerable and real, we're all going to go insane. There's just no other way out but through. So that's where I've really seen the change,
People don't want to talk about grief because I have found people think it's contagious, or dying itself is contagious, whether it was from an illness or, God forbid, an accident. And some people have said they don't want to talk about it because they end up comforting the other person more, and that's exhausting, especially when you're grieving. So how did you figure out how to make space to discuss grief when no one wants to talk about it, and it's uncomfortable, and it's exhausting, and it scares people?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm sure that I want to thank both of you for your own work, because you work with grief every single day. I mean, you're probably swimming in it, and that's, on top of your own losses, which I'm sure you have. And I think that, yeah, I mean, in our culture, we don't overwhelmingly want to touch the topic of death and grieving. And, I can't blame anybody who would want to sit around and think about their own mortality. I just happen to think about it every second of the day, because I have both a dead mom and a dead dad. My father died 4 years after my mom. So I was 34 years old, and I had no living parents. I had no children yet. I had just gotten married, and I felt like everything that was tethering me to, my foundation had been snipped, and I was like free floating through the universe, like the moon, which is slowly moving away from the sun, by the way, which eventually there will be no more total eclipses, hopefully in a very, very long time. But, I just felt like I had something to say about this. And I felt like if I wasn't going to say it in my own way with candor, then why bother saying it at all? And I think that's why the tone of Modern Loss works. We're very unapologetic. We're very direct. We don't do euphemisms. We don't even say things like, they passed on, they passed away. That's okay to use. It's just we are trying to normalize something that is a very universal experience. And we're trying to normalize it by using very clear terms so that even younger people, because we have a lot of people in our community who are parents of young kids, to teach them to say things like, grandmom died, because we want to, if you normalize something that's not normalized yet, then you really do have the ability to change how we deal with a stigma. We have the ability to raise kids who are not going to be freaked out or think that death is contagious or illness is contagious just because they're talking about it. We don't like imagining the reality that we don't have any guaranteed timeline on planet Earth. We don't like imagining, when we hear the hard things that people go through, that they could maybe happen to us or people we love or people we love, right? But that's just not the way it works. Just imagining isn't going to make it so. This isn't like The Secret type of thing, right? This is our only job in this world, in being with someone who is having a real big, profound loss, is just in sitting with them and making them feel seen in their very hard thing. And we're not going to do that if we're freaked out about it all the time.
I remember years ago when my friend's son passed away. He was 8. He had leukemia. They purposely asked people who were coming to not say that the family lost him. They said, we know exactly where he is. He died. And I found that to be so interesting, that the family themselves didn't want to use euphemisms. He died. So that was very moving for me. I've never forgotten that. So I get to point out some of my favorite parts of this book. And one of my favorite parts, you have to get the book. If you have it, it's on page 172. And it's called The 10 People You Meet in Hell. And it's because
I had to stop at 10. But my editor was like, we don't need 23.
But I have told people, I feel like you're talking to me through this book. And I do appreciate the levity. Because when you feel like you can't breathe, sometimes you can still eke out a laugh, right? And you talk about the sad Olympics and how you don't have to compete as to whose grief is more severe. So tell us about the sad Olympics and comparative grief and all those 10 people you're going to meet in hell.
Sure. So we have, so many awesome people that I have learned from. It's essentially people who read the publication, who follow it on social media platforms, who are in closed groups, and they're all over the world. And so they've taught me exponentially more than I could have ever learned from my own personal, one-dimensional view of loss. Well, multidimensional, but just from myself. And what I have learned, though, from them is that we have this thing where we feel like we have to kind of edge each other out sometimes in order to get the space that we feel we deserve to share our hard things and feel like people are listening to us and acknowledging us in it. And so that's when we sometimes tend to one-up each other. It's I know you all have done this because I too have done this, and I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand because I know you've done it. So, like, if you hear that someone's had something hard happen to them, and in your mind you're like, well, it's not like, that sounds hard, but it's not like that hard. Like, I've been through this, you know? Or maybe you've had something really, really, you know, hard happen to you, but then you hear about someone who's dealing with something, wow, like just mind-blowingly, seemingly destructive. And you're like, I don't have any right to feel badly about what I'm going through. Look at what they're going through. That's kind of what we call the Sad Olympics, which is like, we're trying to create this hierarchy of grief, and we're not doing it because like we're bad people. We're doing it because we've done a crap job at normalizing this topic and making it clear that the universe is large enough to hold all of our stories of woe. That there's more space than we could ever deal with to share our stories, to feel heard in them. And because we don't feel heard and acknowledged, that's when we start comparing ourselves to others. And it's just like, it's like if you hear a manager saying, at work saying, hey, like, I don't know why I should mentor this person. I was just thrown in to the deep end when I started. Okay, well, like, I guess you could say that, but how is that really helping? How's that really helping change a culture, you know? And so we really encourage people to own the fact that everyone either loses at the Sad Olympics or you all win. Like, you all win the world's crappiest prize. Like, congratulations. You've all gold medaled in it, you know? Because what might feel like a loss that doesn't seem so bad for somebody, let's say you hear about someone whose dog died, and you're like, oh my God, why are they freaking out about their dog so much? Like, my mom died in a car accident. Well, guess what? Maybe that person has lupus, and that dog is pulling them out of bed every morning and keeping them going and making them exercise every single day. You truly have no idea what someone else is going through. No idea. And so what we do at Modern Loss is really try and talk about this so that we can just encourage people to, like, kind of cut each other breaks a little bit, you know? And then the second question, the first was about the Sad Olympics, and the second was about
People you meet in hell.
Oh, so just to, I mean, like, look, I wrote this book alone in a room during deep COVID in Western Massachusetts in the Berkshires. So there was a lot of snow. There were not a lot of people. So I wrote a lot in like 3 a.m. And that's when some of the weirder stuff came out. And I just started thinking about, like, if I could, you know, create caricatures of the 10 different people I met or that we meet along this like really weird journey that we're on, what would they be? And it's someone who I had worked on this piece with for the Modern Loss website. And we have like the police, I mean, you have to name like some of the example, like just name the
You're
name.
not like an actual orphan, Rebecca.
Right. It's like the denier, right? Or then it's like the rules police. And then it's like some of the names I just had.
You got an inheritance though, right?
Right. It's like the person who's like just trying to push everyone. It's like they're not really seeing you where they're at. They're always like creating excuses. Well, at least you weren't that close, you know, or like, you know, at least they met your husband, or, you know, it's just like there's so many people who are going to either try and inject toxic positivity into your hard experience, or ignore it, or make excuses for it, or try and one-up you. And that is not because they're bad people, again. And yeah, sure, people are kind of crappy sometimes. Like, look at the world, right? But I don't think that inherently it's because these people are bad people or they're wishing you ill. It's because we just... Oh, okay. So... This is definitely something I wrote at 2 in.the morning, and I might have had something strong to drink before writing it. And I thought about, like, how do I want to frame this book? I feel so lucky that a publisher said, we want to buy this book. What do you have to say? I felt very lucky because I was also writing it. This was before vaccine. This was, you know, right around the inauguration of Joe Biden, January 6th. There was a lot of weird stuff going on in the world, in the country. And I was pretty terrified, like everybody else was, you know, and I was also living with a lot of severe illness in my own home. I was pretty scared. And so I actually felt like, this might be the last thing I ever write. Like, literally, who knows? I might as well just say what I have to say. I'm going to go out with a bang and just be honest and not be so precious about, like, whether I think it looks funny enough or smart enough. So I thought, how do I want to frame this book? And I wrote this piece about how I feel like we should look at moving through really hard things. And yet, maybe your hard thing is not somebody dying in your life. Maybe it's a really devastating career change, or a friendship loss, or a divorce, or an illness that you live with. Maybe you're a caretaker. Everybody has their hard thing and things, right? And I feel like in our culture, we kind of frame like being strong, like moving through hard things is like, you gotta be like Norman Schwarzkopf, you know? I like literally sound very old when I say name check him. But you know, you all know who he is. Like, it's like, oh, you're so strong, right? Like you just got this diagnosis, your mom just died, you're getting a divorce, you're so strong, you're gonna get through this. You just gotta power through, you gotta fight the battle, right? How many obituaries do you read that say, John lost his long battle with cancer? It's like, did he lose, or did he just like kind of get unlucky? You know, did like just the anatomy, you know, the poor workings of the anatomy win? Was it really that it won against his willpower, or just like that he just had bad luck, you know? And I feel like the more we say, you're strong, you're gonna push through this, just fight, I feel like that puts a lot of pressure on people who are moving through something hard, because it makes them feel like they're failing if they're not getting up and fighting and resolute every day. And I kind of counter that, instead of using terms like war terminology, you know, like you'll win this battle, let's maybe look at moving through hard things as like thinking about crabs, which is super weird. And my editor was like, are you smoking something? Like, what's going on? And I'm like, I think, bear with me, read this piece. And she agreed that it really worked. And so I did a lot of research on crabs. Harken back to, I had a lot of time. I literally had zero going on in my life. This was like January 2021, you know? I'm writing this book, and I'm like, I'm gonna do research on crabs. Well, it turns out that horseshoe crabs are the most resilient animals in the history of the earth, and that they're not actually crustaceans. So that's a fun fact for your next cocktail party, that they have crabs, and they get to grow them back. So like, please don't go like accidentally cut off a limb. It will not grow back. Don't try this at home, but like use it as a metaphor, please. I feel like the need to say that, you know, devastating loss happens to all of us. And sometimes moving through it looks like spending a morning on your bathroom floor. Sometimes it looks like calling your office and saying, I need to take today off. Not because you're physically sick, but because you need a grief day off. You're having a hard time because of an anniversary. You're having a hard time because you're walking down the street and everyone else looks pregnant and you just had a miscarriage. You know, it's about being kind to yourself and not viewing yourself as a warrior, but viewing yourself as just chopping wood, carrying water every single day.
I once read something, and I wrote a Yisker sermon about it. I wish I could name the author, but she said she wanted to call in sad. She wanted to call into work sad. And like, how many times have you wanted to just call into life sad? It was so profound to me. I've thought about that always. So I'm gonna volley it over to Rabbi Mike, but I have to give a plug. This was my favorite chapter was about boundaries, and about how friendships change when you have a death in your family, because you really kind of see who's your friend, who's the person that knows to just drop stuff off on the porch and walk away, who's the person that knows that they haven't heard from you in 2 days, they're breaking into your house, and then the people who don't even acknowledge it, right? And I just found the idea of, I wrote down, ain't nobody got time for that. No time for frivolous connections. And I think that is a moment when you're grieving that you say, I don't have time for this person, who either will not acknowledge my grief or is trying to like punt me out of mine.
Yeah, I think that what I have learned about from being like a professional griever for the last many years, it's too bad you can't get like a degree in like, I'm a professional griever. What are you? Oh, you're just an MD. So I feel like what I have learned is something that they just didn't tell you when it happens, right? Is that not everybody is going to be a handle being around your things. And that sucks. There's a reason I'm not a rabbi, because I talk I'm not as well spoken as these two amazing people. But it sucks. Not everybody is going to.
We say suck all the time
we
here.
do, and he did give me some alcohol back.
Stop, shh, quiet.
It was a little sippy. So I just feel like, the reality is that not everybody is going to show up for you who you expected to and who you needed to. And that sucks. It is an insult to injury in the grief experience. Not everybody can handle your hard thing. Building and being that crab, being crabby, is in figuring. This was the anniversary of this death last week. I didn't hear from you. It really hurt. You may not have remembered, but I'm telling you, because it was really hard for me, and give them a chance to level up for you. Chances are they will, because people do want to be helpful. They just need you to kind of tell them how to be, because people don't have the inherent ability to intuit what you need all the time, right? But then again, people who don't show an interest in doing that, and those are the people you need to create boundaries with. I really believe that 100%. And I don't think you have to say, you're not my friend ever again, but you can say, I need some distance. My cup is overflowing right now, and I can only handle my own thing. It's just really important. So it is that balance of who do you pull in, but who do you kind of just hold at arm's length to?
Yes, swivel this way. I appreciate your patience for people who aren't as comfortable and not.
I didn't always have it.
Well, but articulating that so well and saying, because I think it's important to tell people I need this from you, because people often do respond well, right? And that's a really good way to articulate it. I also appreciate the crab metaphor, but I want to say two more things about crabs. One, to themselves, they don't think they're weird, first of all, and two, some of them taste really good too. Just want to say
they are delicious. I'm sorry, I know I'm in a synagogue.
Right, but in Shir Shalom you can say that.
I wasn't able to eat crabs for a really long time after writing that piece, because I was you're just so resilient.
Yeah, understandable. Well, just eat one claw at a time then, it's fine. So, speaking of things we don't eat as Jews, traditionally, your book is relevant for anyone. Any faith or not faith is just something that anyone who's experienced loss or understanding other people who've been through loss can be really helpful. But here we're in a synagogue. I'm curious.
Different essays of which I wrote many of them, but then we commissioned some from a lot of people who we really love and respect. And one woman, Elisa Alpert, who's a wonderful Jewish writer, her brother died, and she was talking about the Shiva, and she said, it is the rightest ritual ever created. And I think about that a lot, because I have now shared the concept of Shiva with so many friends who are not Jewish, because people are trying to hang on. They need a scaffolding for a time immediately following a loss that many people who don't really identify with a certain religion or a religion that has this, rite and ritual, they're kind of scrambling for it. And for me, Shiva was incredibly important in my experience. My mom died in a car accident, and it was very traumatizing. It was very violent, and they wouldn't let me see her whole body. And it was so honestly terrible, and I'm an only child, and she was my best friend. And so I needed time to even begin to process what had happened. And the Shiva, I was not feeling a lot of pain. It was my numb period. And I just remember this feeling everyone I ever met in my entire life showed up for it. I had 3 ex-boyfriends there. And they weren't there for me. My mom was that amazing. And so I felt so held. I remember thinking I don't even know if I would feel if I cut myself right now. That's how numb I felt. And just feeling so grateful for the presence of people for days on end who were showing up for me. Clearly I'm Reform. Do we call them benefit levels, I guess, of Judaism. But
This is the crab level of shalom.
yeah. So my parents, I was raised conservative outside Philadelphia. I went to a synagogue called Har Zion, and that was conservative. That's just kind of like where we went. But then my parents switched to a Reform congregation called Mainline Reform. And the rabbi there was so wonderful and kind, and I think he might have been a little high when he came to my mom's Shiva, and he sat with me. He was one of the only people who really sat close to me because people were scared of me. Like, they were like, it was very awful what happened to my mom. Everyone loved her. There were 400 people at her funeral. She was very beloved, very beloved. And he sat with me and he said, "Is there anything that I can do for you?" And I said, "Yes, you can take my Jew card." And he was like, and I literally like went like that, and he was like, "I can't do that." And I said, "Well, why? Here, I'm giving it to you. I don't want it."
Emotions in hearing that prayer every year. I love hearing a story of a colleague who I don't know, who did a good job as a rabbi and was there and helped. Because we rabbis often someone will tell us some ridiculous thing a rabbi did, and they want to vent on us about, like, you hear this. We don't want to hear that necessarily, but it's beautiful that a rabbi is able to sit with you and just share that, yeah, you're still a part of this family, right? And that's really important. And I've always felt like Jews inherently do death well. Like, our is about you said something really, I think, in the opening of the book about what the whole idea of grief is and loss is and understanding it's all about connection, right? It's about connection staying connected to the person who died, staying connected to community, staying connected to yourself. And for me, that's inherently what our faith is as well. Like, but I don't know if you'd like to talk about that idea of where that framework of connection came to you in writing this.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the whole reason that I wrote the book in the first place was because COVID exploded onto the scene, and like everybody else, I was just trying to keep my head above water. I had a child who had just turned 3. I was living in a 2-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side. I had a husband who had very severe COVID as of March 10th, 2020. I had a 6-year-old son, a dog I couldn't figure out how to take outside to pee because I was on the 35th floor, and they were like, "Don't go outside." So it was overwhelming, to say the least. And I found myself so overwhelmed, additionally, by people asking me in the modern loss community, which was mushrooming because so many people had suddenly lost access to their coping mechanisms. They could no longer go to the bodega around the corner. They couldn't go to the Orange Theory class. They couldn't go to, brunch with friends or their pedicures or whatever. They couldn't do the run around the reservoir because we were just told to do nothing. So everybody was spiraling. And then what do? They ask Rebecca, "You're the grief person. What should I do here? What do I do here? What do I do here?" And I was just trying to not go crazy myself. And so that's why I wrote this book, because eventually I said, I'm just going to put everything that I have to say in between 2 covers, and that is a way for me to share all of this because I can't possibly meet everybody's requests. And I realized like the nut of the book was everything that I had learned about how I move through loss. And I'm not an expert at it. I'm not a pro. I'm the crab. I'm just like growing up, going to bed, waking up, doing it again. That's how I'm doing it. But I'm learning things along the way that help. And then I'm learning what doesn't help. And then I'm learning what sometimes helps in some situations and doesn't help in others. And so I have realized for myself that the way that I can feel like I'm like walking along this like rickety boardwalk of like lifelong loss is in making a constant effort at a certain level to stay connected with my parents. Those are my 2 primary losses in my life, and my grandmother. I mean, many losses, but these are the big ones for me. Stay connected with their memories, with who they were as people, figure out how to like honor them in really creative ways, right? just feel like they're still here with me somehow. And also that I'm teaching my kids about them because they never got to meet them. And then I have to feel like I'm staying connected to myself, because what we don't talk about is how grief shakes your body up and down and sideways, how you could have breathing issues, you could have headaches, GI issues. You have so many different things. We don't talk about the fact that your brain literally changes when it's grieving, that your neurons literally stretch to understand a new reality, which is that the given that they got used to, which is your thing is in the world, is no longer in the world. And it's when we say I have grief brain, you do. It's not your fault, it's your brain. And if we could do more to like be, remember that and be kind to ourselves and figure out what we need surrounding the staying connected to ourselves, like how do we deal with good sleep, anxiety, creative projects, therapy. And then the last one, like you said, is staying connected to community, because no matter what, we can't live under a rock. Community is the salve that we all need when we're going through really hard things. And grief is really like the great leveler here. We're divided about everything in the world right now. We can hardly agree on anything, but we all are going to live with loss. And so if we can't figure out ways to create community around our hard things, where are we ever going to find ways to create community? So I felt like, for me, that is in finding the people who I can all hang out with, knowing that those won't be all the people in the world, but that it'll be easier to handle those people if I know I always have constant invitations to talk about my stuff with some people. And also in figuring out, yes, the boundary thing. How do I create those boundaries? And those are just so important. So that for me, community is everything. And frankly, I think that when you feel like you're in a community of any size, be it a community of 2 or a community of thousands and thousands of people around the world, even in a virtual support community or a virtual community like Modern Loss, that maybe you'll never meet anybody in person, you feel like your hard thing, your burden is being one-bedroom apartment in New York. Or the condolence cards that said, there are no words. And I was like, there are words, though. But there are many words. It was my friend Justin Bass's email. I went to Columbia Journalism School with him, and he was like a real wackadoodle. He's like a brilliant journalist who you think may actually shoot himself out of a cannon one day, like Hunter S. Thompson. And he's amazing, just such a good writer, so interested, and just very quirky. And he loved my mom. My mom would always come to New York, and he was from Orange County, so she was like surrogate mom to Justin, and we'd go out to brunch and they'd talk about politics and everything. And so when he found out, I got this email, and it was the only one that stood out. It was all these emails, and the only one I focused on was his. And his subject line was something like total bullshit. And it was a string of very colorful obscenities, literally every single one, and also repeated over and over again, talking about what bullshit it was that my mom died, how fucked up it was that she wasn't alive anymore, how angry he was. And I read that, and it was the only email that my eyes could focus on, because it was those 4 lines, 96% of which were blue words. Those were the only ones that made me feel like someone really was feeling even remotely what I was feeling. And I really needed that, because otherwise I just felt like an alien. Mm. And the worst thing that anyone ever said to me, since you are asking with your eyes, is, oh, your mom died in a car accident. Was she wearing a seatbelt? Don't do that. And yeah, she was. But what business is it of yours?
Sorry.
That's a tip, too.
Right.
About the platitudes.
No,
Don't ask people for information that isn't going to help you in your goal of supporting them. It doesn't matter if they were a smoker, if there were signs of depression, if, there was a history, if they had the BRCA gene. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that the person in front of you is in pain.
Yeah. I notice people often don't know what to say and are so uncomfortable they come up with these things that they think is going to make sense in the moment. And I wonder if in their minds they realize, oh, that sounds really bad. because I really want to call them out, but in most of the things you express, you are patient and you are understanding and you realize they're trying, right? And I've also understand that it's a good way to teach people and help them in a kind way without berating them too, right? Because we want to strangle them in those moments.
Yeah, I mean, I have learned, look, I mean, we've all been in a situation where someone said something to us and we're so stunned by the idiocy of what has come out of their mouth that we're just like stunned in the moment. And we're like, oh, okay, like the dumbest thing I've ever heard, but I don't have a response because I'm so stunned by how dumb that sounded. And you don't say anything, and then later you kick yourself and you're like, I wish I had said something. Well, I always encourage people as they get, not like in the first moment where you're stunned, but as you kind of have to own the fact that people are going to say things that are stupid sounding, that sound unempathetic, that sound low EQ, and it's not because they are, it's because we have to teach them what else to say instead. We are a very productive culture, right, in the US. We like fixing things and getting the job done and submitting the project and the TPS report and all that, right? But that's not what grief is. If we could only just tell everybody, hey, you don't know the perfect thing to say, then just say that. Say, I wish I had the perfect thing to say. This looks really hard. Say that. Say that, why do we have to come up with the one thing? You're not going to be the person who has finally in the history of humanity come up with that thing. Yeah, I promise. None of you is that magical. So I do think that we have to get better at anticipating that there will be times where people say things like, well, at least you have another healthy child at home, and that you feel like you can say, I understand I have another healthy child at home, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about this miscarriage, this stillbirth, this fertility issue, this infant loss. This is what we're talking about. When you talk about that, you're kind of you're making me feel like you're ignoring this pain. Yeah. You have to get better at it. You have to.
We're going to go to the Q&A in just a moment, I believe. But if you'll share one thing I enjoyed in the book, the idea of creating bespoke holidays and as a way to mourn and a way to remember and stay connected. Because personally, in my own experience, have found that to be something special that's helped me. Bespoke holidays.
So I do have and that's in the whole section on staying connected to your person. And I use the term person loosely, the person, the idea of your person, your pet, whatever, you fill in the blank, but I had to choose a noun, so I used person. So, my friend, we all have to kind of figure out how to move through, not survive, just get through hard dates, death anniversaries, birthdays, Hallmark holidays. Those are all on the calendar. They're immovable. They're not going to change, right? And many of them are going to be hard because they're time machines, and we're going to remembering where we were with those other people at a time in the past, right? And so I encourage people to figure out how to reframe maybe one of those holidays, or maybe create a day that has no connection with any of these days, that makes you feel like you have some control within an experience that has very little control, which is grief, right? Grief owns us for a period of time. And then we have to figure out how to grow around it, how our lives can grow around it. And I think part of that resilience building that I talk about is in figuring out okay, what can I do that makes me feel connected to this person, and also maybe I'm even pulling in community around it and I have some support. So one quick example is my friend Amanda. Her dad died from cancer in December, many years ago. I went to college with her, and he was her very, very best friend. They were super tight. His name was Dave Johns, and many years after he died, she just her whole family had such a hard time with his birthday. He died and was born in December, and they moved through his birthday, and it was so hard for them. And one day I get this email from Amanda saying, December 17th is hereby known as the Dave Johns Memorial Big Mac Day. And she said, my dad loved a Big Mac and he loved a Bombay Sapphire. And so I was thinking, instead of feeling like total shit this year, if maybe you could all go out and maybe get a Big Mac or have a drink, or maybe choose something that you really love but you don't let yourself have a lot, but do it for Dave. Because like just think of Dave and then just email me and tell me what you had. That'll make me really happy. And this was probably 15 years ago. And now it has turned into something where every year on Facebook, she just posts the acronym for Dave John's Memorial Big Mac Day, and we all know what that means. And she's like, it's December 1st. She's like, it's coming, 12/17, like, come back with what you did. And every single year, we're so excited because I get to have like, you know, the Shake Shack, like chicken with the crap and the milkshake. Like I go, and I'm doing it for Dave. I mean, like,
Of course you are, yes.
Dave summoned it.
Totally.
You know, he requires it. And everybody posts pictures of what they did and everyone's commenting. It's this communal thing. And guess what? None of us are even in person. It's all over freaking Facebook. And so this woman has managed to turn something that is a really inherently painful, solitary day, individual day, because no one remembers what it's like to be Dave's daughter, Amanda. She's the only one with that, you know, perspective into something that is communal, that has witnesses, and that makes her feel like even people who never met her dad is celebrating him. And that's just an example, you know, but I really do believe in the power of those things. I really do.
I agree. I love that, and I think it can be really beautiful and helpful.
Can I say one really quick thing before you go to Q&A?
Yes, you may.
Like a 1-minute thing. I just want to say that I think that a really big part of living with grief and loss, and especially across the long arc, is not only like accepting, but seeking out very deep into that. But we are all 360 people, and I think some of us feel like, you know, like when people say, am I allowed to cry? Some people ask, am I allowed to laugh? Because we have these social mores that are like, you don't want to laugh. That's disrespectful, or you're supposed to be the widow. You know, like you're not supposed to date yet. Like, well, who cares? Like I said, as long as you're not hurting yourself or anyone else, you do you. You do your weird, hard thing, and however feels good to you. But I do think that the common through line that we all need is to be open to accepting moments of joy as they come, seeking them out, and really embracing the humorous aspects of grief, because there are many of them, because life is messy, and that is what comedy comes from. It comes from tragedy. It just does. And so the more that we can kind of create these moments that are communal, like maybe you don't feel like telling like a morbid joke, but maybe someone else does, and that's how you connect over it. You're like, oh my God, I have a funeral story too. That is how you build community. By sharing your hard things in ways that are kind of disarming. That is what you do in political satire. You share hard things with a dose of levity. And by the way, laughing is great because it reminds you in an experience that feels completely foreign, which is grief, that you're still in there. And what could be more life-affirming than that, you know?
Yeah, as some know, I just got home from Israel. With a Shir Shalom solidarity trip, and it was, I said, amazing and amazingly difficult. And, you know, I was reading with your quote from Brene Brown as well about vulnerability, and for me, you know, the ability to cry so openly, I didn't anticipate that. But I also laughed so much with my Israeli friends, and for one moment I felt like, crap, how am I laughing? You know, and we were walking away from tragic scenes, but you realize, like, these are Israelis guiding us in living with this constantly, and the reality of this is life, like you said, and the balance of that. And that's how they're coping too. But being in that with them was amazingly powerful and important, and so it resonates with me greatly too. So, Ellie, how are we doing questions now?
Rebecca or the Rabbis Live can also just grab the mic.
Ellie, do you want me to just talk about the 6-word memoir first before? Okay. So we'll do some questions, but I just wanted to plant the seed for something that we're going to do for just a couple minutes at the end of the Q&A, which is something I really love doing. It's called a 6-word memoir. I don't know who of you have heard of this, but I have to say supposedly now because maybe he didn't write it, but Ernest Hemingway had like an extremely short story, and it was For Sale, Baby's Shoes, never worn. And that's commonly attributed to Hemingway, but now we're like, did he really write it? We don't know, but who cares? Whatever. What is truth anymore? We're in a post-truth world. So what I really love about six-word memoirs is that they're a really awesome, accessible way to venture into sharing stories that might be based on experience that are very hard or overwhelming to share about. It's a very democratic way of sharing experiences. It's only 6 words. They can be 6 words that are just like separate words. They can be phrases. They could be a sentence. And I really love inviting people at events to share their 6 words on loss. And it could be anything. It doesn't have to be death loss. It is, what would your 6 words on loss be to you? So while we did the Q&A, I would love for you to think about what yours might be and maybe have some volunteers. It's not going online anywhere. It's a closed room. And I'd also be happy to give a couple examples. Like one woman who had a miscarriage said, never met you, but love you. Another person shared, she never got to see Paris. One person wrote, 10 years on, still really sucks. One was, you would have been a great mom. And I'll say mine would be tonight in honor of where I am. Your grandkids are Jewish. You're welcome.
So I have one of the questions that were handed to me so I can read for you. Do you have any thoughts on kids and grief or kids and anxiety about the death of loved ones?
I have so many thoughts. That's a really good question. So I have 2 kids who will never meet my parents, which is never okay and always hard. And I have to continually come up with ways to kind of not be so on the nose about teaching them about my mom and dad, you know, but creatively inject them into their lives so that they grow to love them, the idea of them as well. So my kids love to joke, like, mommy talks about death all the time. Like, that's her thing. She talks about death, you know. I do. I mostly talk about life, about grief. I talk about what it's like to move through the experience of living after a death, after experiencing a death loss. And I think that's very life-affirming. But by extension, I am very, very, I kind of like wed to this gospel of we have to be very honest and open with children about grief. I think that we are disingenuous and we don't do them any favors by trying to hide our feelings from them. I think that when they don't see us cry or have very hard moments, I'm not talking about like us like spinning out and like hurling a plate against the wall or like, you know, downing like 10 shots of vodka, like go do that like in your bedroom or whatever, if you're gonna do that. But I mean like just having human range of feelings, saying, mommy's having a really hard day today. Like today is like an anniversary day. It's when your grandmom died and mommy's really sad right now. Or like really missing, you know, my daddy or grandpa, like, and talking about them, talking about the realities of death, you know, bringing them to funerals. Yeah, I actually am a huge proponent of bringing children to funerals because many people in the modern loss community were children when they had losses, and they actively have to live with the fact that they weren't brought to funerals as kids. And as they grew up and became more equipped to deal with feelings of grief, that is something that they cannot shake off. They were never given the chance to move through that. I always say the worst has already happened. The person has died. Nothing worse is happening. Bringing a kid to a funeral is allowing them to feel like they are saying at least a physical ritual goodbye. This is not a scary thing. And the more we make it scary, then you're going to make it a scary thing. And then you don't move the needle on this. You keep stigmatizing it. So I just really am very, very open with children while saying that kids need to be spoken to at their own level. Like developmentally, you know, you have to speak to a 2-year-old the different way in which you speak to a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 10-year-old. But the through line is always like, this person died. It means their body is no longer working. It will never work again. They're not coming back here. They're not coming back. We can visit them in photos, in memories, in stories, in dreams, but they are not coming back. And that is really important. It's really important because it confuses kids otherwise. And in talking about death and fears of death, you know, my kids go through that all the time. I mean, my 7-year-old is in a big, like, I don't want to die stage this month. And while I have moments where I almost want to say, it's okay, you're not going to die. You know, sometimes I'm like, maybe I should just say that. No, he's going to remember that. And I don't say that. I don't say, like, that's not going to happen for a long, long, long time. I actually don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't say that, though, either. I just say, I'm so lucky that you're here. I'm here. We're both healthy. I have no plans to go anywhere. You know, I go to the gym. I'm like just doing my thing. We have so many fun things to do. There's so many things to look forward to. I just try and anchor him in the moment. It's almost like a mindfulness technique of bringing them back and grounding them. And talking about death, yeah, but like making it something that you're comfortable talking about. Because the more you look uncomfortable, they're going to be uncomfortable. No one wins.
Do you have a question there too?
So, because people in the back can't seem to hear me. What are your thoughts about support groups, grief support groups, and how to make them helpful and how to have people join? What are your thoughts about that?
I love grief support groups. Join a support group. That's awesome. I think that, you know, it just has to be one that like vibes with you, you know, like don't go to like the mother loss group. If you go there and you're like, I feel really weird. Like there's no one here. I feel very uncomfortable here. I feel like this isn't the tone that I want. Don't like fit a square peg into a round hole, you know, or try to, because it won't work. When my mom died, I went to the JCC Manhattan because this was like well before there were like specific niche groups for different types of grief. They were just like, it's a mother loss group. And I was the only person younger than 70 years old. I was 30 years old. And that's all well and good because I can bond with people of any age over loss. But at that moment, I knew what I really needed. I needed young people who had to go to work every day and were just freaking the shit out about how to do this and how to live life without their moms and how to mother themselves. I needed that, you know, so I didn't keep going to that because I didn't think it was like really meeting my needs. There are also like different types of support groups. There's something called a peer-to-peer support group, which is more led by a facilitator, right? And then you're kind of like talking and helping each other. You're sharing your experiences. Or there's more like an agenda support group where the moderator is actually leading the session and has different topics every single time. So, you know, it could also, finish, it could be a support group that is virtual, you know, like Modern Loss. It could just be a support group that you deem a support group because you feel supported in it, you know, like if you follow the Modern Loss Instagram feed along with tens of thousands of people, you're going to feel seen in your grief. You're going to feel like you have an ongoing invitation to post a comment and get a comment in return from people, and you can feel like that's a community too. That's a support group. Anywhere you feel supported is a support group.
How can you relate to God when you feel like things are just so unfair?
I mean, I think that the very, very smart, amazing people on either side of me probably have a better answer for that question. But for me, you know, I'm very, very comfortable in my Jewish identity. And for me, it's less tied to, I would say, for me personally, an idea of like God and more of like an identity of feeling like I have thousands of years of tradition at my back, you know, supporting me, witnessing me, upholding me, expecting something from me. I don't know what it is, but, you know, I always feel like a dose of Jewish guilt and expectation. And so, you know, the God thing, like I said, I sat and told my rabbi that I was out because I didn't want to be a part of this, you know. I think that it's more in feeling comfortable with your relationship with, you know, if you believe in a God, whatever the God that is, you know, what's your relationship? Do you feel like you can be honest with that God and say, I'm really angry with you, or I don't want to think about you for a while, maybe not for 10 years. Like you know, like that, I think it's just about being honest with yourself. And that's what makes you more comfortable with your relationship with what you believe in, you know, really giving yourself what you need.
That works, rabbis. So far, it's good. He's made you a rabbi. It's good. That works.
Well, I've told people many times that you can put God in timeout, and you can walk away from God, and you can say, "I'll see you when I see ya." I'm totally fine with that, because I think there are just times when maybe you are too angry to have any kind of relationship. But I always say, like, don't leave, don't just walk away. Just everyone goes to their corners for a hot second. This one's not a question, but I'll phrase it as a question. What do you do with, let's say you have a parent loss and your siblings will not ever talk about it? How do you grieve a parent when you have siblings, or any kind of loss in the family, and someone just won't acknowledge that the person died?
First of all, whoever wrote that, I'm really sorry that that's your situation, because that sounds excruciating. And I have heard this a lot. I've heard this from, people who have had a sibling die, and then the parents are not talking about it at all, because their way of, like, I would say coping is, not like denial, but like in not going there, because they're scared they'll never come back from that conversation. And that is extremely isolating to the person who really does need to connect and talk about that stuff. And so I've actually done some stuff with this woman, Priya Parker, who's a wonderful writer, and she's an expert in the field of gathering. Her book is a bestseller. It's called The Art of Gathering. She had a New York Times podcast for a while, and she and I have talked about, like, kind of setting intentional gathering experiences for people, especially for ones who won't, have trouble talking about someone, and saying, like, I really am feeling lonely right now. I really need to talk about Mom. And we don't have to make it like a 5-hour thing, but I would love if we could could we get dinner? Could we go to her favorite movie? Could we do something that's like tactile, like a project that's like connected to her? Could we just do something that connects us over that memory? Because I'm feeling really alone, and I miss you. And I wonder if you're feeling alone too. I'm not going to ask you to talk about it. I'm not going to ask you to spill your guts. Could we find a common denominator activity that makes us feel like we're just together in this? And that, I find, is a really good place to start. You can't force somebody to, spill their guts when they're, not willing to or terrified to. They have to come to it on their own. But baby steps are what make it clear to people that, like, not like that they should because of you, but like maybe they need to because of them. It's hard, though. It's really hard. I mean, my dad wouldn't talk about my mom. I mean, he would talk about her, but only between the hours of midnight and 5 a.m. when he would email me. I'd wake up to email. I'd wake up to go to work, to my comedy show, to have to pitch political comedy pieces, and I would have these long emails of memories, the traumatic memories, thoughts, wishes, yearnings, and I didn't know where to put that because he wasn't really willing to talk to me about it in real time. So that was really kind of an added burden to me. So I would say, like, don't do that to each other in families.
We all grieve differently. I appreciate The Art of Gathering in Priya Parker's book too, and it's a great recommend. I always love when we grab someone's book and you see who's pitching it and talking about it. And I just want to point out that Adam Grant became bar mitzvah on this bima here.
What? Yeah. Oh man, he's a Philly boy now.
All right. Yeah, I know.
No.
So you were at.
You guys have the same hairstyle.
He did not. I had the same hairstyle as bar mitzvah. He did not back then. But I'm very proud. All those children who made fun of me for being bald when they were 13. I rue the day. So. Before we conclude, I want to return to the 6-word memoir. I know you want to do an exercise with that, and then I know you have something special to share at the very end, too.
Sure. Okay, so I already shared mine. I shared a few examples. I didn't know, did I plant the seed with you guys? Do you have one prepared, or am I putting you?
Anita?
Who's going to start off? Because if not, I'm going to call on you.
Oh, you can run, yeah. We can trust Mitch.
So, first of all, I enjoyed your presentation. I just have to share, I lost my father when I was 13. So I have found that I am extremely comfortable with death, more comfortable than many people that have to grieve. And I have to recognize that in myself so I don't go someplace where they're not ready to go. But you said 6 words, but I only came up with 5. And so mine was, my mental breakdown healed me.
I like that. Anybody else want to share theirs? Yes, no? You don't have to. Wow. Do you want to pick your
Arlene,
favorite?
that's not 6 words.
You want to pick your favorite? Pick your favorite, or the one that speaks to you the most.
30 years wasn't enough. Come back.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Mine is anything all right? Anything is all right.
Thank you.
Betsy? I said Betsy, it says.
No. Are you good? They cherished democracy.
Hold on one second. This is good.
Oh, I'm sorry. They cherished democracy. Good, they're gone.
Wow.
Too bad we still can't count their vote. Yeah. What's that? Yeah, I know. It was just a suggestion. I wasn't really thinking it, not at all.
I appreciated your book in the fact that it takes a humorous approach, not the typical word salad that you find a lot of times. And Rabbi Mike could tell you I've always been the one-liner kind of guy. And I appreciated the aspect or the way you looked at it. And from a personal thing, I'm about to be 8 months into losing my wife, or as you said it, my wife died. And I've gone out to gravesite a few times, and people will ask, what did you derive from it? And perhaps it ties in with the 6 words. I would jokingly say, well, she didn't interrupt me. She let me finish a sentence, but I was still wrong.
You can see that even if you don't stand up, and share that maybe I planted the seed for even just thinking about what would they be. Think about them on the drive home. Do it with like a friend or your partner, because this really is a good way of thinking about like what is coming to mind, like the body keeps the score. It holds on to the things that it knows you have to think about or reflect on or deal with. And this exercise is a really good way of having things come to the surface.
Do you want to share your poem? So, I mentioned I just got home from Israel, and we were talking about that and the reality of October 7th for us as a Jewish community, and the challenges around that, and the balance of our emotions with this as well. And still being a very difficult time for us as Jews, feeling alone in this world. I know Rebecca had a poem, something she's been concluding with that's brought meaning to her and that she wanted to share with us as well.
Yeah, I know that everybody has 601 different opinions about how they feel and what is going on in Israel and Gaza and Judaism and progressive identity or whatnot. It's been a really, really, really hard time of loss on top of an already hard time. So many layers and years of grief. And, I just think, I just have this wish that we could just see each other less as like, what we're condemning or not condemning, or just seeing each other in the fact that we all are living with grief. We are all living with layers of pain, and respecting that in each other, instead of one-upping and butting and all this. And so there's a poem that I always think about, like, every day, and it's by W.S. Merwin. And I just feel like it applies to every type of grief I've ever felt, whether it's a person or an identity or a place or feeling. And it's called Separation. And it goes, "Your absence has gone through me like a thread through a needle. Everything I do is stitched with its color." So I just wanted to end on that.
Well, we really appreciate you sharing that and sharing of yourself so intimately and personally, and that we learned through your experience and your story and through the Modern Loss Handbook and all the materials you provided for us. So thank you to Reboot for bringing you to us, and to the Well for helping sponsor this as well, Temple Israel and my colleague, Rabbi Jen Kaluzny, and all of us here at Temple Shir Shalom, Brian Fishman, for helping organize things. And I will share one last thing about support groups. We do have a unique support group here for parents who've lost a child, that a very difficult group. And if you're interested in that, I see some of my friends who are here right now who've been a part of that group, who meet regularly. And I know there's a couple seats that are still available around that table. So if you're interested, let me know, and we can get you connected too. But, we're Jews, so that means we have to eat something now. And so thanks to Reboot, we have a little nosh out in the lobby to enjoy with Rebecca and all of us together, and really to, share the blessing of community. So thank you, Rebecca, very much.